Chapter 8, The Essential Activities of a Sorcerer. 1. Seeing. At various times during their association, Don Juan spent a lot of time talking about and showing Castaneda 3 activities intrinsic to a sorcerer's being. He called these seeing, dreaming, and stalking. Seeing is an activity removed from the other 2, which are converse methods for accomplishing certain things in the world, and entail skills that must be practiced, whereas seeing is something that a sorcerer at one point is simply able to do. Seeing refers to the ability to perceive deeper, and thus more real, aspects of the universe. For example, a person when seen, appears as a luminous egg. Sorcerers can interpret variables in and nuances of the egg in order to discern various physical and emotional truths about the person being seen. But seeing is more than visual, it is a knowing, a certainty about things that one could never otherwise be certain about. For example, very early on Don Juan challenged Castaneda to remember a particular bird that he hunted, while a teen living on his grandfather's farm. For a long time, Don Juan urged Castaneda to remember. Castaneda got annoyed, 1, because he couldn't remember anything, and 2, more so because of the air of certainty that Don Juan spoke with. Don Juan spoke as though he himself had been there to witness it, and his statements made with great certainty made Castaneda angry, since of course Don Juan couldn't have actually been there. Don Juan, unruffled, continues to urge him to remember. He tells Castaneda that he is seeing the bird, right now. This goes on for some minutes, until some sort of dam breaks in Castaneda and he finally recollects what Don Juan was talking about, an albino falcon that Castaneda tracked all over the valley for an entire summer, trying to bag the crafty bird. Don Juan's manner and words in this incident are indicative of what seeing is like. The sorcerer who sees can comprehend the ultimate nature of things. He or she can discern facts about people, or theoretically any living thing, by a careful examination of the luminous body, and with the experience to know what one is seeing. At another time, years later, the 2 men are in Mexico City and Don Juan spots a man in a park, who seems to be in some distress. Don Juan challenges Castaneda to say what's wrong with the man. After a brief pro forma protest, Castaneda focuses and blurts out he drinks too much. Castaneda immediately tries to explain that he had no idea why he said that, but Don Juan explains that seeing is like that, one makes statements with great certainty and force, often with no idea why, especially at first. One of Don Juan's most masterful teaching tricks was to introduce seeing to Castaneda as something to be learned. In reality there is no way to learn seeing. Seeing is the end result of a person being initiated into the sorcerer's way, and doing enough of the right things enough of the time. At a certain point it just happens that by setting it up as a thing to be learned in Castaneda's mind, Don Juan got Castaneda to buy into any number of things that Castaneda otherwise would have resisted even more than he did. Activities such as being inaccessible, disrupting routines, etc., held little interest for Castaneda and, as we've seen, were actually quite negative for Castaneda to even consider. But, when they were set up as necessary steps to learning how to see, they became much more interesting to Castaneda, and became worthwhile activities. By making seeing into an academic pursuit, in effect, Don Juan tricked Castaneda into doing all the things he needed to make seeing a reality in his life, but which, without the pseudo-goal of learning to see, he would never have taken as serious suggestions to actually attempt to implement in his life. This is a classic and major example of how the teacher of sorcery often has to trick the student into doing what needs to be done. One of the most intriguing aspects of Castaneda's work, to me, is that when viewed from the end, the finished product, for lack of a better phrase, one sees something beautiful and correct and desirable, but that the steps to achieve that are so frightening or distasteful at first that one needs to be repeatedly tricked into undertaking them.
2. Dreaming. I mentioned in passing in a previous video that the ancient seers noticed, when they saw people who were asleep, that the assemblage point is less tightly affixed to its habitual spot during sleep. From this single fact the ancient seers discovered and explored an incredibly complex and powerful universe of possibilities. The modern sorcerers, as with everything else, expanded on what had been done previously, and repurposed the discoveries of the ancient seers. The ancient seers figured out how, with much practice and trial and error, to turn regular dreams into dreaming. Dreaming entailed asserting a measure of control over one's dreams, over time to the degree that one has the same kind of volition and control that one has in normal waking life. The advantage of being able to do things in dreaming is that what Don Juan called the dreaming body is not subject to the same strictures as the physical body. In dreaming one can travel great distances in an instant, one could even theoretically travel back in time, in effect. As Don Juan relates it, the older concept of dreaming was concerned with power. The idea of having a double, a dreaming body, was seen as a way of enhancing one's power, a way of even, theoretically, acting against one's enemies with double effectiveness. This way of thinking persisted even up to the time of Don Juan's teacher, the Nagual Julian. It's not entirely clear how Julian regarded or used dreaming, but clearly he was at least aware, either first-hand or via communication from his teacher, the Nagual Elias, what the old way of dreaming was about. To the modern sorcerer, dreaming is not for power over others or personal gain, but to foster and enhance awareness. Footnote 1. In fact, one could summarize the difference between the old and new practice of sorcery as the difference in orientation, from power in the old way to awareness, in the new way. This difference permeates every aspect and situation where the old and new practices of sorcery are compared. A few months into the apprenticeship, Don Juan introduced the concept to Castaneda, and instructed him in what Don Juan called setting up dreaming, his phrase for the preliminaries of dreaming. The idea was that Castaneda was to try to make himself look at his hands in a dream. Once that was accomplished, he was to work on shifting the gaze from the hands to some other object, because in dreams objects focused on will quickly dissolve. So the second step consisted of looking at another object for a few seconds, going back to one's hands, onto another object, back to one's hands, etc. In this way one could theoretically explore one's entire immediate surroundings without objects dissolving or the scene shifting to a normal dream. Footnote 2. In reality, what one is doing by trying to find one's hands is capturing the exact moment one transitions from wakefulness to sleep. This allows one, with practice, to have what others have described as a lucid dream. There are doubtless many other steps and techniques to achieve the total awareness that is sought after, a dreaming body that is a perfect replica of the physical body, but Castaneda doesn't go into those mechanics very much. Thus this is an area where I have to extrapolate a bit. Eventually, one learns how to move in dreaming, and so on, as one's facility in dreaming increases. Footnote 3. It's stated later that there is a gender difference regarding dreaming and stalking. Men, Don Juan says, can develop a fair facility in both, whereas women are either dreamers or stalkers, but are capable of achieving much greater heights in the one activity they do. Castaneda had some early success in finding his hands, but shortly thereafter he was unable to and was stuck for a while. Don Juan assured him that his progress in dreaming would improve as soon as he tightened his life up more, that is, started more faithfully following the personality-changing steps discussed in chapters 6 and 7, among others. Footnote 3a. Dreaming proceeds in fits and starts for Castaneda more or less the whole time of his association with Don Juan, and afterward. I can't be sure, but this is probably not an uncommon thing. Don Gennaro, a Mazatec Indian sorcerer, Don Juan's best friend, and an important figure in Castaneda's apprenticeship, said that after one very stunning experience early on with dreaming, nothing happened for another 11 years. Whenever Castaneda got stuck, Don Juan would suggest some activity for Castaneda to do, or to do more thoroughly, and, despite Castaneda's initial hesitancy, doing what Don Juan prescribed always got him unstuck in his dreaming. Footnote 4. Don Juan instructed Castaneda, as all students of sorcery are, to remain celibate. As he put it to Castaneda once, there is no other way. You can use your sexual energy for having sex, or you can use it for dreaming. I don't think Castaneda ever talks about how faithfully he followed this dictum, but given the power and facility in dreaming Castaneda eventually attained, one can assume that he must have eventually followed it.
3. Stalking. Stalking refers to a way of efficiently and powerfully dealing with other people in life situations. The word, innocuous in the 1960s and early 70s, is an unfortunate one today. Needless to say, stalking refers not to any criminal activity or threatening behavior. A way I think of it in this context is like a hunter, observing the habits of game and thus honing his or her technique. Stalking was what Don Juan described as 4 moods, 4 characteristics of behavior in dealing with other people. A stalker is ruthless. B a stalker is cunning. C a stalker is patient. D a stalker is sweet. Understanding what exactly he meant by these 4 adjectives is crucial. I think it can be summed up by a succinct recitation of what they are not. Ruthlessness is not cruelty. Cunning is not fraud. Patience is not passivity. Sweetness is not stupidity. The stalker is a strategist, and then a tactician. He or she carefully observes, extracts the important elements, and then creates a plan of action. Then, once the plan is set in motion, the stalker makes adjustments in line with the changed circumstances that present themselves, as necessary. A real-world example. A friend asked me for advice about how to handle situations with her new boss. I suggested that she employ the 4 moods of stalking. How would this work? Ruthless. My friend needed to know what she wanted, what her desired future state was. Promotion? Happiness? More money/power in the department? To be left alone? Being able to identify this, with brutal self-honesty, is of paramount importance. Without a clear goal, the stalking exercise is pointless. Cunning. Observe the boss carefully. What are her objectives? What is going to make her work life better/easier? Is she a time server, counting the days to retirement? A hard charger, looking to be CEO by the age of 40? Does she love her job? Hate it? Understanding her desires and motivations is also paramount to success, since it dictates how one will formulate one's plan. Patient. Understand that people do not warm up to new people and situations right away. Give yourself time to discover all the background information necessary, and enough time to let situations settle. Sweet. Regardless of one's personal feelings, act as though you love your job and your boss, not in an exaggerated, clearly fake way, but in such a way that doesn't draw any undue attention to you, positive or negative, until you are sure of your bearings and have a plan. One can then come up with a plan of action, based on the 4 moods of stalking. Success is not guaranteed, but the chances of success are much greater than if one goes in willy-nilly with no idea of what the most important aspects of the situation are. For example, if one's boss is not the hands-on type, and doesn't care about lower-level processes, engaging him or her in a detailed discussion of how these could be improved is not a winning strategy. Rather, a quick bullet point or 2 describing the improvements at a high level is a much better way to go. It frees up one's time and tells one's boss that you get it, where his or her preferences and way of working are concerned.